And I'm just gonna switch over to YouTube real quick and see if we're okay. Yep, looks like it's gonna work for YouTube.
Yeah, I was going to say, I got a little message on my screen that says meeting is
Yep,
now streaming live on YouTube.
yeah, that's it. Well, we're in there.
I didn't get a message.
Are you on my? Are you? Do you follow me on YouTube?
So go to YouTube.
Yeah, just go to the show, and that's it. And I'm gonna make an announcement to so people can come over. And as a matter of fact, I'll share it. Okay. And I'll just share it to. Wait a minute. I'll share it from here onto
I
Facebook.
don't see it, Gail.
Go to Shypanther and Friends Show. Uh,
It's
Marcia,
all one word, right?
right. Uh,
I guess it doesn't switch automatically, Gail.
what do you mean? We're on YouTube. We are.
Yeah, I'm just saying, when I first logged on, um, and then you said
Site
you
Uh-huh.
want to switch
and
to
fan
YouTube.
show.
I didn't do anything, but I got a notice on my screen
Oh,
that said,
because
you're now streaming live on YouTube. I never touched my computer.
oh, well, do you follow the show?
Do I follow the show?
Yeah. I mean on YouTube.
No, I don't follow it on YouTube, but
Well, maybe I don't know. I don't know.
it went straight to YouTube. I'm glad
Okay.
it did because I
Yeah.
might have had a problem trying to find it on YouTube.
All right. I'm sending it to Marcella so she can just go
Yeah,
in.
mine won't come up on my phone.
You're on YouTube and you just went to because the show is right there. It's right there.
Okay, now I got it. I have
All
it.
right. So remember, if screens are gonna be, if your phone be open, you should mute your screen because it's gonna cut out whatever we say. So, or either you have to mute.
I'm trying to find it on YouTube. You said it's Shy Panther and Friends Show.
Yes, it's Shy Panther space and space Friends Show.
Shy Panther, one word and then space. Is that what you?
Okay.
Right, and then space and Friends Show.
Okay.
Yeah, it's coming up. Shy Panther and Friends show live.
Uh huh. That's it. Okay.
Shy Panther, one word and then space.
Right. And then space Friends.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, it's coming up. Shy Panther and Friends show live.
okay, so I can hear us talking double.
Yeah,
So,
it's repeating everything.
right, because you have to turn down your phone or whatever you're watching. Turn down the show on something else. But stay on the screen that you're on, like the computer. But if it's your phone, you have to turn it down.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we can get started. 1 second. Let me turn off this phone before we get an interruption. Okay. All righty. Good evening, everybody. This is Shy Panther and Friends, and today is Thursday, October 22nd, 2020, and the time is now 7:31 p.m. We're broadcasting live on YouTube because we couldn't connect to Facebook. So we're doing the best we can to make sure we get up live. And welcome. So happy that you could join us, and please share the page If this is your first time checking out Shypanther and Friends, we're normally here Thursday evenings at 7:30 p.m. And the whole mission of the show, the goal of the show is to uplift, to empower, and to educate. And the mission is to provide quality programming. All right, so October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So today, our topic is going to be discussing issues around domestic violence. And we're going to be talking about possible things that we could do to support and assist domestic violence victims. All righty, so I am your host, Gail. I forgot to say that. And you can reach out to the show at Shypanther and Friends Show #1 at gmail.com. That's Shypanther and Friends Show #1 at gmail.com. And if you want to donate to the show, you can do that at paypal.me/Shypanther. So welcome, everybody. Welcome, guests.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey, so we have Marcy here, we have Clarence, and we have our special guest, Stephanie Love-Patterson.
Hi.
So panel, go ahead and start introducing yourselves.
Marcy's first.
Okay, Marcy.
Okay, my name is Marcella, and they call me MJ. I am the owner and creator of Taylor B's Beard Oil, and I also work at OEMC. And these are my past coworkers and current coworkers. Well, actually, past coworkers for both of them. But I'm glad to be here tonight.
And I'm Clarence. I'm retired. I retired from the Chicago Police Department back in '96, and I went immediately over to OEMC. I spent 17 years there, and I retired from there in 2014. And right now, I just do a little odds and ends to keep myself busy.
All right. Now for our guest of the evening, Ms. Stephanie Love-Patterson. Thank you for being able to make it here tonight. So happy to have you.
Thank you. Thank
Okay,
you. I'm sorry. I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, go ahead.
Again, my name is Stephanie Love-Patterson. I'm the executive director at Connections for Abused Women and Their Children, Chicago's oldest domestic violence agency. And we have services in Humboldt Park, walk-in services for victims and survivors. We also have services at Stroger Hospital, Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Haymarket Substance Abuse Treatment Center, and we have a domestic violence shelter in Humboldt Park, Wicker Park.
Wow, so great. That's great. You have services pretty much located all over the place to help people to get to the help that they need.
That's right.
Okay, so domestic violence, it can hit any level as far as income level, social, economic level, of course, any education level. It doesn't matter whether you're white, Black, Asian. It can happen to any one of us. And a lot of times it's going on and the victim won't come forward. They won't say anything. And that's where it helps to be able to identify or just be able to pick up signs when something like that is going on. So what are some of the things that you would advise us just sitting down and talking with you? Say you're addressing us, a group, and we're saying like, well, what are the first things that we should be aware of in a situation like that?
I think one of the first things is kind of what you said, Gail, and that domestic violence can happen to anyone. Sometimes people have a real narrow view of who victims of domestic violence are, what they look like, what socioeconomic status, what educational background, the whole 9 yards. And so it's important for people to know that it can happen to anyone. On the flip side of that, perpetrators can be anyone too. Sometimes they have a narrow view of who they are, but we know that they are doctors and attorneys and teachers and police officers and faith leaders, and so it can happen to anyone on either side. One of the things that I would advise people to do, to answer your question, who are not quite comfortable or feel safe with disclosing the abuse is to let them know that the conversation that you're going to have is a confidential conversation, that you won't go blurting out to everybody else, oh my God, so-and-so said that they are a victim of domestic violence. Because if they think that's going to happen, they won't talk or share anything about their story. It's another thing to let them know that they're not alone. One of the big tactics related to domestic violence is isolation. And so people would be surprised at how many people are almost hostages in their own home. Many of the things that we take for granted, going to church or school or work or so on, or hanging out with our friends, victims of domestic violence can't do. Even if they're allowed to go to work, they have to be home at a certain time or else they're going to get in trouble. And so they feel like they're all alone and this is only happening to them. And so it's important to let them know they're not alone and that, you're available to help. It's really good for your viewers just to know, to educate themselves on resources available for victims and survivors of domestic violence. Oftentimes people will say, the first resort is to call the police. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it's certainly necessary in life-threatening situations, volatile situations, but sometimes they don't want the police call. But there are so many other options, like calling an organization like Connections for Abused Women and Their Children.
Stephanie, I have a question.
Sure.
Is there a definition that you could actually put on domestic violence? The reason I ask that question is because a lot of times when people think of domestic abuse or domestic violence, they think of it in a physical sense. And it doesn't have to always be physical.
Right.
Could you kind of get into that a little bit?
I absolutely can. That's a great question. So domestic violence is a series of tactics used in an abusive relationship. It can be a single time event, but most of the time it's a series of events designed to establish and maintain power and control over one individual, over another. It can be an intimate partner or it could be a family member, because family members fall under the guides of the Illinois Domestic Violence Act. And in those tactics to establish and maintain power and control, you have things like isolation, which is huge, and kind of like what I talked about earlier, where victims are not allowed to participate in many of the social activities that we may take for granted. There's also threats and intimidation. So it might be things like, you better be home at a certain time, or you know what happened the last time, or I'm going to get you, or remember what happened to, my other girlfriend who disobeyed the rules, or threatening looks and things like that. Other tactics used can be things like economic abuse, where sometimes abusers will not allow their partners to go to work. I'm the breadwinner in the household, and so I'll take care of us. Or they will allow their partners to go to work, but they take their money, and maybe give them a little bit of an allowance, they'll call it. Other tactics include emotional and psychological, and honestly, that's where domestic violence starts. For most people. A lot of times people think it starts automatically with physical abuse, or as you said in your question, sometimes there is no physical abuse, but it starts with name calling and belittling. You're stupid, you're ugly. Kind of like that scene from The Color Purple with Mr. who dogged out Celie. You're stupid, you're black, you're worthless, you're nothing. Nobody wants you. You're gonna leave me? Nobody wants you. I don't even want you. So it can start there. It could start with all kinds of other emotional and psychological abuse. Other tactics are sexual abuse. Sometimes perpetrators will say, hey, look, we've been married or we've been together for 20 years. You have to give me sex whenever I want to, or in the way that I want to. I don't care that you don't feel comfortable with doing some of the things that I want to do. There's also, I talked about isolation. There's also using children. Abusers love to threaten to take children away from the victim. So in other words, if you leave, I'm going to report you to the police and they will come and arrest you and you'll never see your children again. Or if you tell anybody what's going on in the household, I'm going to kill the kids or hurt the kids. And so you're absolutely right. It doesn't always involve physical abuse. Many clients that we've talked to said maybe the physical abuse was early on. Now there's not so much physical abuse, but it's the threats and intimidation and other forms of abusive tactics that remain in the relationship.
Okay. Now, earlier you mentioned that people can reach out to connections for women, for abused women and their children. Is there a hotline number that we can?
There is. Our 24-hour hotline number is 773-278-4566.
Okay. Okay. And I was going to say too that that abuse can come. Oh my goodness, it can show up in a lot of different ways. And I was thinking about really when we were talking about the show that a lot of younger adults are involved in abusive relationships, and it can be a male too. He can be the victim of abuse.
Yes.
And people always think that it's always a woman, but it can also be a man. And I wanted to say that as a young person, I was in a situation where my boyfriend was very, very intimidated by the fact that I was in college. So I've seen it where they try to prevent you from doing things to better yourself, to go to college, just as you said, from working. They don't want you to work, or they want to give you a little bit of money and you're just home, and it is very, very isolating. But I realized very early on in that situation that I could not, I had to get out of that, because I knew, there are definite signs of people who are abusers, but something that you said at the very beginning of the show, that the types of careers or the people who happen to be perpetrators are really, you would never suspect, because I never thought for a moment, okay, a doctor or an attorney or a teacher, any of that. I would be quick to think something else rather than a professional person, but it's not true.
Right.
So yeah, it's very, very serious, and it happens a whole lot. And now that we're in a pandemic and people are home together with the potential abuser, it's going up.
Right.
The occurrences are happening more and more. And with it's very, very hard to talk about, hard to think about, but we are here. So, Marcy, did you want to address Stephanie with anything at this point?
Hi, Stephanie. I wanted to just kind of scale it back a little bit and just ask how you guys started. I got online and I read that you guys started back in 1977, and you were the first domestic violence hotline, and you opened the first shelter here in Chicago called the Greenhouse Shelter in 1979. Can you speak on how that actually came about? Was it from experience? Were you one of the pioneers that actually started it? And were you at the very start of it? Or how did it come about? What is the history on it? Because I've never heard of CAWC before.
So we started back again in the 70s when there were very little domestic violence resources for victims and survivors of domestic violence. I was not one of the pioneers. I've actually been with the agency though for 21 years, 6 years as as executive director. But there was a group of women, some of them who I still know, who sat around a kitchen table, so the story goes, and they just said, look, we're tired of people being killed and harmed in our community, and children witnessing domestic violence, and there being little resources available. So that's when they started the hotline first, and which we still operate today. And then a couple of years later, the Greenhouse Shelter was started, just as a resource to be able to house individuals fleeing abusive relationships, because the individuals that started the organization at the time just realized that if we ever want to properly address the issue, we've got to find a safe way, safe outlets for victims to go to. Because you can only stay so long at a friend's house or family member, and sometimes that's not even a safe place to go, because if the person that's causing harm knows where your friends and family members are, then they're now in jeopardy as well. And so after that, then CAWC has a history of being visionaries in our work. And then we just grew from there to start our program at the old Cook County Hospital. I was born there, so I keep calling it Cook County Hospital, but Stroger Hospital, and where we realized that individuals were coming for medical attention at a really critical time. It's a good opportunity to have healthcare providers screen, ask 3 quick questions of everyone that comes in there, whether there are obvious signs of abuse or not, about domestic violence, and then provide them with services and connections to other resources that are available. And then again in 1999, we thought, well, substance abuse is another great opportunity, because we know individuals reported to us that they turn to drugs and alcohol to self-medicate. If I'm high enough or drunk enough, I don't have to deal with the pain literally or figuratively. We've heard from some of the folks that we work with. And unfortunately, for many folks, they'll tell you that they are forced to make what I call a non-decision, which is to say, in other agencies, we'll help you, but you got to get clean first. We'll help you, but oh, we found out that you drank last night or did cocaine or something like that. Once you get sober, then we'll help you. Well, we're taking away that non-choice by providing dual intervention, domestic violence services and support while they are getting substance abuse treatment services. And then later our Humboldt Park project, which was in 2000, we started that program as well to serve the community. And it's not just Humboldt Park, but really we have people that come from all over Chicago. And I don't think I mentioned earlier that we have legal advocacy services as well. A good portion of our advocates' time is spent at Domestic Violence Court at 555 West Harrison Street. So that's kind of a little snapshot of the services and the history behind the services.
I also wanted to add, you still have the same acronym, CAWC, but it was originally called Chicago Abused Women Coalition, and you changed it to Connection. Why the change?
Good question. So we found out from a lot of funders that they don't fund coalitions. And so we'd have to explain when we would submit proposals that we are not indeed a coalition. That just happens to be the name. And so we thought we need to correct that so we could, stop having to have that conversation. We also wanted to highlight the fact that we do work with children, because a lot of folks forget about the children in domestic violence situations. And we do a significant amount of work. We have children's advocacy services and family trauma therapist services that work specifically with kids who have particularly negative behaviors as a result of witnessing and or experiencing the abuse. And it's funny you asked me about our name, because now we're probably going to change it. We are going to change it again, just to be reflective of the fact that I think Gail mentioned that domestic violence does happen to men. Well, we've always provided services to men and individuals in the LGBT community and things like that. And so we wanted to make sure that our name accurately reflects the fact that our doors are open to anyone who needs to access our services.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. That sounds good.
Okay, I'm sorry, Marcella.
No, go ahead, Jill.
Okay, you mentioned you offer legal services, and I did notice too that you have court advocacy, and I think that that's very, very important because I think it takes a lot of courage for a woman to, if they have to call the police, to actually go those extra steps to press charges and to follow through and to show up at court. I think that's very difficult because of the threats and intimidation. And a lot of times women or men going through or experiencing domestic violence, their self-esteem is low, just how they feel about themselves is not very great. So it would take a lot of support and a lot of courage to make it that far. And then if they have, once they get to court, if they have somebody right there with them every step of the way, helping to speak for them and assisting
Right.
them. I think that's great.
Thank you.
I really do. And then I was thinking about the whole thing because even when I wanted to make the flyer, I didn't know how much to say, help yourself or self-help or empowerment. I didn't know how much to say because I know what it is, how it feels to be a victim of domestic violence. And then people think that, why is she staying in it, or why is, you get a lot of criticism, but there's so much involved to why that person wound up in the spot that they are and why they can't appear to just run out of it. And I'm so happy that you guys have focused on self-help and empowerment. And that means everything, education and social change, and just the whole way of the institutional advocacy. I think that's what changed the whole perception of domestic violence.
Right.
So it wouldn't be a secret anymore. And for whatever reasons, the abuser has become the abuser. We don't know. And I think rather than focus so much on that, focus on what this person needs right now, what the children need right now. So I think this is great.
We do. And I just want to say, and thank you so much for the compliment. And I do want to say that we do work with organizations that work with folks who do cause harm. So there's a group called Center for Advancing Domestic Peace. And they actually work with the perpetrators of domestic violence. And so it's important to have a really holistic approach to this, because we absolutely need to be available and provide services to individuals who experience domestic violence on the victim side. But if we really want to get to the crux of the whole situation, we have to acknowledge that there is this other side. There are individuals who are causing harm. And, and just studies show, and there's lots of data or some data out there that just talk about the fact that some of them, and we know if they grow up in households, you take a little boy, for instance, if they grow up in a household where there's domestic violence and there's little or no intervention, that person could potentially grow up to think, well, this is acceptable behavior. This is how I negotiate matters in my own home. This is how I express love. Even and unfortunately, that becomes a pattern or a cycle of violence, kind of what we call, or even in the church, we call a generational curse. Some people refer to it. And so we do try to have a really holistic approach to this. And so we do partner with organizations that work with perpetrators.
Stephanie, have since COVID has been indoctrinated into our society, what has there? I would think that there has been a increase in domestic violence cases, and what have you seen to be some of the causes where these things are occurring?
We have seen an increase for example, one of our collaborations is with the Chicago Police Department's 14th District, which is where our shelter sits. And so there is a program there where police officers respond to calls. They conduct a safety assessment, and with the victim's permission, they will circle those assessments back to our agency for us to follow up. We saw a pretty significant increase in those assessments and in those calls. We know the City of Chicago Domestic Violence Hotline, who gets reports from all over the place, and certainly from the police department, has seen a pretty big increase. I think a 9 to 11% increase was the last I heard. I think probably even more than that when Shelter in Place first started. In fact, I know it was more than that when Shelter in Place first started. And so we know that victims and the perpetrator, they were living right there in the same household, forced to shelter in place with the very person that wants to continue to hurt them or even try to kill them. And so, yes, we absolutely saw a spike in those numbers because people couldn't go anywhere. And it's hard to call out for help. It's hard to hop on your phone to call when the person that wants to cause harm is circling around. We heard a lot of, excuse me, descriptions like, circling around like caged animals a little bit, watching what they do on their computer screens or listening to phone calls and things like that. And so there were definitely increases in calls. What we didn't see was a big increase in calls for shelter because, again, people didn't know how to get out. And so a lot of people thought we would have seen that, but we didn't. Once the state and the city kind of opened up a bit more, that's when we started to see our calls returning to normal.
Mhm. Yeah, I can remember as a young police officer when we would answer domestic disturbance calls, and we would get to the location and make an assessment. And sometimes the victim would even ask, well, is there a shelter that I could go to or whatever? And back during that time, because I'm talking 69, early 70s, there was no resources really for that. And it would be frustrating to us because we knew that these people needed some assistance, but there was nothing that we could really do about it other than have the perpetrator because they would resist signing a complaint. So then we would probably take the action of, well, you're going to have to leave. And a lot of times that made the situation worse because now usually it was the man who was feeling that, oh, I'm being put out of my house. So, okay, I'm going to be gone for an hour, or he might go to the bar and get him a couple shots. And now he's really up to it. So it got to be interesting trying to deal with situations like that. So I'm glad to hear that there is some resources available. Probably not enough, but at least there's something that can help a certain number of people anyway.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And so, one of the things that victims of domestic violence often hear is, why would you stay? Why don't you just leave? And sometimes the answer is, especially back in the day, as you said, is leave and go where? And even now, there are only 150 beds for victims of domestic violence. And so oftentimes, so my shelter is a 42-bed shelter. Now we're operating at half capacity because we have to be able to socially distance within the shelter. But, so sometimes the questions and people don't know, just as you said, folks want to leave. Who wants to stay and get, hurt or even killed? But sometimes there's no place to go. And we've heard from a lot of victims, sometimes the devil I know is better than the devil I don't know. Or I don't want to, if I leave my home, I'm just going to have to wander out in the streets because the shelters are almost always full. My shelter is almost always full. And I could speak for some of the other domestic violence shelters in the city of Chicago. And so it is tough now, but it certainly was tough back then. One of the neat things about the police department and organizations like Connections for Abused Women and Their Children is that many police districts have a domestic violence liaison who works really closely with domestic violence organizations like mine. And so there's that relationship where we can work in concert to kind of help resolve some of the issues and just work as a team when we can.
Do you take in families? Do you say mothers and children? You take in families?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm happy to say, I'm proud to say that when we opened up, we were one of only 2 shelters that allowed victims to bring in their children, male children, up to the age of 18. A lot of shelters, the cutoff age was 11, 12,
Wow.
13, because there was a fear that some of these young boys look like men, you know. I'm not the tallest person in the world, and so I had to look up to a lot of these young boys. But our organization knew right from the start that victims weren't going to leave their boys at home to become the next victim or to learn how to be a perpetrator. And so we've always, now there's a federal mandate that says shelters have to take in boys through up to the age of 18. And so that helps to eliminate that. Again, kind of what I call a non-option of, do I leave and I leave my boys home, or, you know, or what? And so, so that's getting a lot better. But yes, we absolutely take families. And even when I say families, that means, so sometimes it's a mom and their kids or dad and their kids, but it may extend to, like, you know, there may be the mom's sister that's living in the home, and it's a dangerous situation. We can allow them to come to the shelter as well.
Mhm. I know when they, back in the late 70s, early 80s, when they did, I know they had a facility open over on the west side. I can't remember where it was now, but we had issues with sometimes the women. We would take them because we knew where it was, and they would want to leave. And once they got in the car, then we would tell them where we were going to take them. But then they would have remorse or whatever, and then they call the boyfriend, and then the next thing we know, we're getting a call from the shelter that the boyfriend has arrived. Has arrived there because the victim called them and told them where they were. Do you have that issue now?
So from time to time we do. You know, leaving is a scary situation. As I said earlier, sometimes, you know, folks have said the devil I know is better than the devil I don't know. Moving into a communal living situation, let's take my shelter, for instance. It's a large shelter, 42 strangers. And so you're being asked then to move in with people that you don't know. If you're single, you know, adult, you're being asked to move into a place with a bunch of kids, because many of our shelters, the largest population are children, because sometimes, you know, people have just large families. That can be a tough living situation to be in. Also, on the other side of that, you've got the perpetrator sometimes blowing up their phone saying, look, I'm gonna find out where you are. And when I find you, I'm gonna kill you. And, you know, or if you tell anybody about what's going on, I'm gonna kill you. Or I know where your mother lives. So we had a situation where an individual left, kind of the same situation that you just mentioned. The police brought her to the shelter. We had space. She came in. The abuser, first thing he did, he got on the phone and said, I know where your parents are. Well, her parents were elderly. They weren't going anywhere. You know, they weren't going to move anywhere. And he said, I'm going to go over and kill you. And then the next phone call or two, he actually was there. And he was inside of the house, had kind of wormed his way in, and he had a gun to her parents, you know, heads, and said, you know, the next call will be, you know, that they're dead. And so the woman, you know, packed up her stuff and went back home, because what could she do? Even if she called the police, at that time, he was actually in the house. And the one thing that we know, and you probably know, you know, as well, I'm sure you know, as a police officer, is we talk to the victims about believing the perpetrator. When they say they're going to kill you, or they're going to kill somebody else, to take it very seriously. A lot of times people are like, oh, he's not going to do it. He's just trying to make you scared and say this. He's not going to do. No. We know that there's a very good likelihood that they will carry that out. We've heard from Chicago police, from Illinois state troopers, that domestic violence related calls are some of the most dangerous calls that are out there, because of the volatility on the part of the perpetrator.
Yeah, it's an emotional situation, and emotions you lose it. And once you get to a point where you lose control, then you're subject to do anything as a offender.
If I can respectfully sort of like change the way I see it, is about it's establishing that power and control. And it's just like if you feel like you're losing that control, it's an incredible dynamic to see the length that abusers will go to establish and maintain that power. It's like once they feel like that power is being taken away from them, they don't care if the police are there. I've seen situations where perpetrators have been in court after they receive an order of protection and they've just been told you'll go to jail if you violate that order. And right there in the courthouse, they will do something they'll threaten the victim or they'll hurt the victim. That's the power of power and control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it can get interesting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well,
Question.
I tried to avoid that. I've got 3 daughters, and I would always talk to them until even when they got up to where they were dating, and all 3 of them are married now. Mm-hmm. But I always instilled in them, do not, under any circumstances, let a man put his hands on you in anger. Mm-hmm. You better tell me. I said, otherwise, I'm going to get you myself. I wound up threatening my own kids. But anyway, those 3 daughters will tell you to today, and the youngest one is 31 years old. And they'll tell you, you put your hands on me, I'm going to tell my dad.
There you go.
But you have to let them know. But not all women have that situation. And then there has to be another alternative for them to be able to reach out and get the help that they need. And of course, I also talk to the people that they dated also.
I'm sure.
And let them know, no, you don't want to do that. But that's just one example, but
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I have a question. Stephanie, what fail-safe measures do you guys have in regards to perpetrators who come to the shelter and can potentially be a threat to the other residents of the shelter?
Our shelter is a confidential
Do you
location.
have to? Do you have to I was going to say, do you have to? I mean, has it gotten to the point whereas it has gotten so bad, maybe with one resident and her perpetrator, where you had to really put them in hiding or make them leave? Not
Yeah.
make them leave, but send them somewhere else so that they can be
protected. So our shelter is a confidential location. We are very, very careful and cautious about who we give that address out to. We try our best to get our residents to maintain that confidentiality. Sometimes it works, sometimes not, for various reasons. I mentioned that we're in the 14th Police District, and so we have a really good relationship with the police department there. And so if we call 911, they come out and they realize we're calling from a shelter, and and we let them know a perpetrator is there, that they come right away. And so that really helps. We also do, participate in roll calls with the police department. So there's a real relationship and not just somebody calling out of the blue, which makes a big difference. We also have cameras and we have security gates and things like that. But we have had situations where perpetrators have found out that, because stalking is huge. And we always talk about safety planning and trying to encourage victims to really be careful where they're going, be careful about where they're using, credit cards, cash station cards, because abusers, if they're getting the statements at home, they can go, oh, okay, so they're over, in this area of town. And so abusers have come to the gate. We call the 14th district, and they help us, right away. We have had situations where victims, where the perpetrator has found out and it's no longer safe for them to stay at our shelter. And we'll do sort of a switch with a resident at a different shelter location. So, maybe someplace way on the east side or the south side or something like that, so that, we'll take one of their clients and they'll, accept our client that's in danger. But it's a serious thing. We had a client once whose partner was a police officer. He was with Vice out in California or Florida or somewhere. This guy had a lot of resources to his avail. And this woman moved, she went to, I forget how many different states before she landed in the state of Illinois. And he eventually found her, because the one thing that people should know is that some perpetrators are very tech savvy. And so, like we encourage people to, if you have a cell phone, get rid of your cell phone, particularly if if your partner gave you the cell phone, if he or she gave it to you, there could be, devices connected to it where they could be tracked, all kinds of things. And sometimes people take us up on that, and sometimes they really don't, because they don't understand until it, sort of happens. And so I remember this guy that was that worked with Vice. He kept on and kept on until he figured out where she was, and caught her out in the street one day. And he didn't kill her, but he hurt her, and basically told her, he wanted to let her know, I'm not going to kill you this time, but I want you to know I can kill you. And so he left her with that fear. He burned her with cigarettes and, and all kinds of stuff, and then just let her go. And so we had her moved. She eventually came back, but we had her moved, and eventually they were able to get this guy. But yeah, we have to do a lot of safety planning work for clients, for victims of domestic violence who are still in their homes trying to figure out how to get away, and then even after they come to our shelter. Because as I mentioned, power and control is a really serious thing, on the part of perpetrators. And it's almost like they make it their full-time job to find out where their victim is, and they keep on until they find them and eventually possibly carry out that threat to kill them.
Do you have to, one quick question, do you have to pretty much, I can just believe that this can be very devastating to children. I saw a lot of violence in my home growing up, and between my uncles and stuff, and it doesn't haunt me, but those images are still there. Um, is it a lot of psychological deprogramming that you have to do with children? Is that a lot tougher than dealing with the actual abused female or male? Are the children able to bounce back? What I'm trying to put it the right way, are they able to bounce back um, just as not as fast, but get them to, you know, of a sense of normalcy more so than the victim themselves, or is it a lot of work that you have to put in when it comes to the children?
It can be. Children are resilient. And so some kids, once they just get in a safe place and they know mom is safe and they know they're safe, they can be okay. But in some cases, it's a lot of work to repair the damage. I mentioned earlier, we have a position called family trauma therapist position, and they work specifically with kids whose moms or maybe teachers or maybe through our own observation have seen where they're taking on the persona of the abuser. They're now acting out in an aggressive manner where they're violent towards their siblings, they're violent toward their classmates, they're violent towards mom. Or their grades are failing, or they're very clingy to mom. Because you can imagine if you're a kid in a household and you hear day in and day out, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill your mom. I'm going to, take you away. I'm going to do this. And you see some of the physical violence that has a huge impact on them. And kids, don't necessarily have the language to say, I'm angry, I'm mad, I'm scared, I feel responsible. Some kids come in and they feel like they're the blame for everything that's going on. And so, yes, in some cases, it takes a lot of counseling and therapy to help undo some of the damage that was caused by living in that particular environment, and the fear that they experience, and what will I come home to? I have a lot of teachers in my family and in my circle, and we talk about this a lot, where kids are coming into school and teachers are trying to figure out, why can't they concentrate, or why can't they focus, or why are they sleepy, or or whatever, a whole number of things. And sometimes it's because they're still dealing with and reeling with some of the things that that happen at home. I tell people all the time, even if they aren't physically abused, excuse me, they still hear the yelling. They still see the police coming and taking, why is daddy being arrested? They see the furniture turned over in the household. They see mom with the bruises and the black eyes and the blood, and and all of that sort of stuff, and all of the commotion that comes with that. That has a big impact on them, because again, they don't really, and it's hard for them to vocalize all of those feelings. So I'm really proud that we have not only a children's advocate, but a family trauma therapist. I was telling someone recently, many of us and many of the viewers on your show may think, okay, when it's time to eat dinner, we sit down as a family and we just have dinner and we talk about our day or talk about school and things like that. Oftentimes that doesn't happen in homes where there's domestic violence, because sometimes the mom or dad may be like, okay, you hurry up and eat your food, do your homework, and go in the room before, before my partner gets home. And that's because they don't want them to see the abuse. They don't want them to be used as a cause for the abuse. And so they're rushing them away. And so even after they've left the abusive situation, sitting down and having a conversation over a meal is foreign to them, because that's just not how things are in their household. So it's some like simple concepts that we do, with just like, let's sit down and let's, just have a snack or a meal or something and talk about your day.
And I can imagine that it takes time. The trauma that they experience is like what you said earlier, PTSD, where they're not used to it being calm. They don't, it's like they're anticipating something all the time. They can't just relax and rely on continuity, and like things will be calm and they'll be nice. They don't know what to expect next. And that's terrible for a child. And what is the rate of, say, the abusers being locked up, and what kind of time do they normally get? Or Clarence, can you might be able to speak to that too.
A lot depends on what they're initially charged with. That has a lot to do with it. And that will determine whether or not they're going to get any sort of time. I can't adequately answer that question simply because I retired in '96. So that was a long time ago. But I can remember some cases where it was frustrating because we knew that the offender had really committed egregious act towards towards the female. It was a male toward the female, and they had taken that step of pursuing charges and going to court, and then you get decisions made where the person might just get probation or something of that nature, and they're back out, and now they're more angry than they were the first time. And you can look at that and you know that, especially if they live in the area where you're working, you're going to see them again. And
Right, because now they feel like, oh, I'm sorry.
no, I'm just saying it, and it'll probably be worse.
Yeah, because now it's kind of the thing, like you called the police. One thing about people who perpetrate domestic violence is very rarely do they take responsibility for their actions. It's always, you made me do this. You are the reason the police came to the house. You're the reason, that my life is so messed up. You're the reason why I got put in jail. And just as Clarence said, once they get out, oftentimes they come looking for the abuser. I'm sorry, for their victim, and it starts all over again. And that's where some of the perpetrator services or service organizations come in, because they can interrupt some of that in some cases, not all, but yeah, that's tough.
Okay, so Stephanie, what would you suggest that families do as far as supporting the victims when they reach out to them? What are some of the things that we can do?
Some of the things that family members and friends can do is, first of all, believe them. There are some situations, and I bet Clarence can attest to this, that sounds so outrageous and so far-fetched that it's almost unbelievable. And it's followed up by abusers saying, they're not going to believe you. The police will never believe you, or the judge will never believe you, or your mother and father will never believe you. And in some instances, they're right. A super quick story is a friend of mine who used to work when there was a mayor's office for domestic violence. She worked with this, or heard about this family where this, her husband, this victim's husband, was very tech savvy. He figured out how to somehow mount a recording device into the thermostat in their home. And he recorded these voices, like very faint voices. And it was just the two of them that lived there. And when he left, she would always want to turn the heat up because she was always cold. And once you turn the heat up, you could hear faint voices. And he would come home and she's like, don't you hear voices? And he's like, no, just listen, no. And then he's like, you're going crazy. Excuse me, you're going crazy. Because abusers like to make people think that they're going crazy. And she would even invite people, kind of sneaking them over. And whenever he had a feeling somebody else was going to come over, he would deactivate that device. And so she actually thought she was crazy. The only right way they figured out this device was theirs because one day the system broke. And without even calling him, she asked a repair person to come by. They took it apart and he was like, what's this? And they figured out that it was a recording device in there. And so you can imagine if she's, this is your sister and your sister's coming telling you that I'm hearing voices, that you're not gonna, she's gonna have a hard time getting people believe her or believe that, okay, maybe you need some psychiatric help. So I would say if someone is telling you these even wild stories, to believe them. Validate their stories and let them know, thank you for letting me know. I'm sorry this is happening to you. There's help and there's hope. You can give them, hotline numbers. I'm going to repeat CAWC's hotline number, which is 773-278-4566. And you can give them, numbers to call like that to be able to get some help and support. Certainly if they're in immediate danger or their children in danger, I always tell folks to call 911. If you see or hear something where this person is in danger, I always tell people, what would you want to have happen if it were you or if it were your mother? Because some people are like, well, I'm not calling the police, I'm not going to get involved. But if it were your family member, you would want them to get involved. And then to just talk to them about, to reassure them that it's not their fault. Sometimes people will say, well, and I can't believe this, but still in 2020, they'll say stuff like, well, if you were a better mother, go home and try to cook or put some makeup on and fix yourself up a little and all that kind of stuff. Be a better wife or a better mother and it'll be okay. Well, that's so far from the truth and such a victim blaming thing to say. Instead, it's good to tell them where they could get help. The viewers that are watching this show can tell them about CAWC. Our website is cawc.org, where individuals can go and get additional help and to learn about services. It's good for people to educate themselves about domestic violence, not to become DV experts, but just to know a little bit about the signs and tactics like we talked about earlier, to educate themselves a little bit about shelter. People are very fearful when you say the word shelter. They sometimes equate domestic violence shelters with homeless shelters, where homeless shelters you can't get in until a certain time of day, and then they put you out at a certain time of day, you know, to get resources and go to work and things like that. Domestic violence shelters are totally different. You get to stay there 24 hours, you know, a day. You know, sometimes people just need that time to heal, literally and figuratively. So educating, you know, people yourselves about those services and things like that. Those are some things that often are helpful. And one other thing that's key is to ask the victim what they want to do about their relationship. They're told all the time by the perpetrator, go here, do that, be here, you can't go here, no, you know, wear this, wear that. The last thing they need is for any of us to come back and say, this is what you should do. And I know it's an instinctive kind of thing to say, oh my God, you need to call the police, girl, get your bags, get your kids, and just go. We got to pump the brakes and ask the person what they want to do about their relationship. And people would be surprised at how freeing that can be. When we do that, because we have an options-based approach, victims will say, you know what, you're the first person that's asked me in years what I want to do. Because sometimes they don't want to leave. Sometimes they just want the abuse to stop. And sometimes that can be achieved by getting orders of protection. They have stay away orders of protection. They also have no violent contact order protections, which people aren't as familiar with. So the perpetrator doesn't always have to leave. Sometimes with an order of protection, they could stay in the house, but the courts have said you can't have any firearms in the house. You have to go to a substance abuse treatment program, can't have any drugs on the premises. You can't make any threats, physically or verbal threats, to continue to harm the person. And so asking them what they want to do is like one of the best things that you can do. And then I will say, if you know somebody is a victim of domestic violence and you're trying to help them and they say, oh girl, that's okay, thank you, you know, thank you so much for that, but I'm good. Don't give up on them. Keep the doors open, you know, tell them things like, okay, well, if you're not ready now, if you feel like if things get worse or you feel like you want to talk, you can come to me. And, you know, I can, you know, I have resource information that I can provide you so that you're keeping the door open. Because it's a scary thing to, you know, raise your hand and say, hi, I'm Stephanie, I'm Susan, I'm whoever, I'm a victim of domestic violence, because there's a lot of shame and guilt associated with being a victim of domestic violence. And the victim doesn't know how you're going to respond. Are you going to go, oh my God, what did you do to get that black eye? Or hey, Joe, Susan just said that you beat her. Is that, you know, and get her in more trouble and things like that. So what you're doing is planting a seed by just asking a question in a sensitive, non-judgmental way, or offering support, and you're leaving the door open so that maybe not today, but maybe next week, next month, or even a year now, they can come back and say, you know, you had a number, you know, for me. I'm ready to leave, you know, and if you could give me that number, that would be helpful.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie.
You're welcome.
You guys have any final questions for Steph?
No, just quickly, you know, a lot of times because domestic abusers, many of them, I won't say all, but many of them are control freaks. And if you are, as a family member, if you see that trait in somebody, you might just want to keep an eye on them, or you might want to say to your family member, you know, I know this old boy's a control freak. You know, he's very controlling. You might find a way to mention that to kind of let them know that you're looking out also, because they may not see it. But I have found that a lot of people who are have a tendency to want to be abusive, they will show you tendencies that they will go in that direction. You just have to see it.
That's so true. Yeah. And one of the things that we talk about is in terms of, perpetrators is making it, uncomfortable for them in, the situation. Cause sometimes people will ignore it. It's like, ooh, man, Joe came over and, he was yelling at her and stuff and not really letting them get away with it in a safe way as Clarence, I think was saying to, especially, you know it's hard and people sometimes focus on the victim. There should be some emphasis on the person that's perpetrating domestic violence or showing those signs to let them know this is unacceptable. We're not going to have this. You can't come to my house and yell at your wife or sit there and hit her or and stuff like that. And you'd be surprised at how many people have that situation and just let it go on. It's also important to remember, again, the flip side of that. As Clarence said, some of them you can kind of see those signs, but in other folks, it's like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. Some of them can be just as cool and smooth, and they'll have, other people going, girl, he's fine. He treats you nice. He's got a good job. He treats, everybody here nice and all of that kind of stuff. He pours on the charm. I wish I had that man in my life. I could find somebody like that. And the victim is thinking, oh, no, you don't, because once they get home, it's a whole nother story. And so we hear that a lot. It's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. They know how to, so like we talked about power and control earlier, they know how to control the anger enough to be this charming, wonderful guy, a person out in public with everybody else, and they save up that violence for once they get home. If they were somebody, and they'll say, oh man, I just lost control. If they were truly out of control, they would be violent all the time to everybody. They would be violent to their supervisor who maybe passed them up for a promotion, to their buddies at the bar, and all of that kind of stuff. So they very much are keeping things into control and controlling their behavior.
I wanted to ask a question too. Not really ask a question, but I read multiple articles too. Whereas it doesn't matter what class it is, too, it's very prevalent in wealthy people as well.
Oh yeah. So I used to work out in Lake County, out where Michael Jordan had his mansion. I don't know if it's still out there or not, but out there with Vernon Hills and Libertyville, and trying to think of some of those other wealthy suburbs and stuff. And there was a shelter out there that I worked at. And so we used to have clients that came from very wealthy communities. They themselves, the victims, they were CEOs of companies and things like that. And their partners were fire chiefs or police chiefs or doctors, surgeons and things like that. So yeah, it definitely happens. The thing about some victims in wealthier communities is they have the resources to seek private therapy and counseling. And so they don't necessarily get counted in numbers, just like folks coming to Cook County Hospital. They take all your name and your information and it's in the database and all of that kind of stuff. But yes, it happens to them. Sometimes it takes a little longer for them to realize that they're victims. I facilitated a support group when I first started there, and it was all white women. And one woman, I remember saying, it was really an interesting conversation about kind of when they realized they were victims. And this one woman was really honest. She was like, well, I thought, I must not be a victim of domestic violence because I'm white, I'm wealthy, my husband's white, wealthy, and she said, she looked at me and she said, I thought victims of domestic violence looked like you. And that they were Black and, from communities of color. They also thought about educational levels, economic levels and things like that. And it took a minute before she realized that what was happening to her wasn't just about her husband, his job being threatened and things like that, but that she actually was a victim of domestic violence. The resources that are used are different. Stalking in poor communities may be just them taking off from work and wandering around to figure out where the victim is, or having some of their boys look for it. But the same woman that told me about how she moved into the city. Her husband had the resources to hire a rent or whatever you do, a helicopter and a telescope or whatever it was. And they flew over the area where he kind of thought she was. And then he flew, but he confirmed that he saw her. He flew back home and then called her and said, that was a really nice red sweater you were wearing there. And you really ought to get some help getting the groceries in the household and stuff, and scared her to death. Again, just to, that power and control, didn't want to hurt her or do anything right then, but just to let her know, I'm watching you. And that was a level of resources that he had.
Mm-hmm.
That's very, very scary.
Mm-hmm.
Unreal.
Yeah. And I've heard actually some kids like who became teens say the same thing, that they realized that they were being abused and they didn't know as much because that's how they grew up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's so sad. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Wow.
Okay. Stephanie, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
For the people watching, Stephanie Love-Patterson, Executive Director for Connections for Abused Women and Their Children. Thank you so much for joining us. And for anyone who's experiencing domestic abuse, and if it's an immediate situation where you need to get help now, call 911. Do not hesitate to call for help. And also you can reach out to the CAWC at 773-278-4566. And also you can go to their website, cawc.org, and learn everything about the organization and what they can do to assist you. They have a lot of contact with a lot of different organizations. They've been around for a very long time. They know exactly what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And they're really, really great. I've been following you for many years, and I actually watched how domestic violence calls could be handled. From the beginning, it was kind of like how people used to be. You could hear some woman being beaten or a man being beaten. Nobody did anything. Stay out of it. They're married. We can't say anything. Mm-hmm. And stay out of it. That's their business. And when the police got there, a lot of times that was their thing too, to stand back. But that for a lot of different reasons that was going on as far as the police were concerned. But I'm so happy that that's changed. That I don't know about how many years they actually started taking this very, very serious. And even if the woman did not want to press charges, or say the victim didn't want to press charges, the state's attorney started pressing the charges. Am I right, Stephanie?
Yeah, in some cases they do. If there's serious enough, injuries and things like that at the hospital, we've seen cases where it's been life-threatening situations. They didn't want to press charges, but yeah, the state's attorney will do it.
So I'm so happy that all of these things have changed and for the better. So we have to do what we can to support them and remember to believe them and to make them know, validate them, call for help, and ask the victim what they want to do. And if you notice that they're with someone you care about, is with someone who's a potential abuser, the signs are there, you speak up, you say something, you let that abuser know that you're watching them. Do that, because a lot of times people say, no one spoke up for me, no one tried to help me. People watch me go through it and no one said anything. So, it's really serious. So I'm so happy that we did this show and we're doing what we can to assist as much as we can. And one more thing before we go, Thursdays, what do you guys do on Thursdays that's special, Stephanie? As far as
today actually is Wear Purple Day. So this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, the whole month of October. And so today is we are wearing purple to just acknowledge domestic violence awareness.
Okay. And is that something that you do every Thursday, or just because it's
just because, it's National Domestic Violence or National Wear Purple Day.
Okay. Okay, everybody.
That's why I have on my purple shirt.
Awesome. Very
Well,
good.
I don't have anything purple, so I couldn't jump in on it. Oh, okay. All right, everybody. Thank you, viewers, for watching the show. Share the information. You can reach out to us at Shypanther and Friends Show #1 at gmail.com. That'll do it for us. God bless you, and take care of yourself. Take care of your neighbors. And good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're